It all began on a cool fall day in the mountains of North Georgia, or so the story goes. It was 1828, and young Benjamin Parks was walking quietly through the woods looking for deer. As he wandered, his foot struck an unusual-looking rock, one whose deep yellow color made it stand out on the forest floor. This, it's been said, was the first discovery of gold in Georgia. And this story, though, while widely known and often repeated, is only one of many popular legends about the start of Georgia's gold rush. And while Benjamin Parks may not have been the first to find gold here, he was far from the last. He later recalled,
"Well, sir, the news got abroad. In such excitement you never saw. It seemed within a few days as if the whole world must have heard of it, for men came from every state I'd ever heard of. They came afoot, on horseback, and in wagons, and it's acting more like crazy men than anything else."
The prospect of quick and easy fortunes attracted thousands of people from around the world. In short order, the mountains of northeast Georgia were filled with miners hoping to strike it rich. Although gold had been found in other parts of the country much earlier, never before had so many people come together so quickly to search so frantically for the precious yellow metal. By 1829, the first major gold rush in the United States was in full swing. In Georgia, the gold belt stretches for about 150 miles, from the farthest northeast corner of the mountains across the state to Alabama. The richest and most productive portion of it lies around Dahlonega, in the watershed between the Chestatee and the Etowah rivers. In the early days, gold literally lay on top of the ground. Although big nuggets were few and far between, gold filled the streams and stream beds throughout the area, and many miners made their living with nothing more than a shovel and a gold pan. But the desire for gold led inevitably to a fierce competition for land. In 1830, the state of Georgia claimed as its own what long had been Cherokee territory. Spurred by the promise of untold fortunes, Georgia began exercising a claim that went back nearly 100 years, to the time of its colonial charter. By 1832, the state was surveying the stolen Cherokee lands, dividing them into lots, and distributing them through a lottery system. 133,000 qualified citizens, but no native Cherokees, were allowed to register for a chance to win one of 35,000 gold lots. As thousands of miners poured into North Georgia, they began pushing out the Indians who had lived here for generations. In 1838, in one of the most tragic events of gold mining history, the United States government sent troops to round up the Cherokees. They were forced west across the Mississippi River. This devastating march, known as the Trail of Tears, left thousands dead from cold and starvation. But it did nothing to slow the rush for gold. In the early 1800s, whole towns seemed to spring up almost overnight. One of the first to be established was Auraria, a community named for the Latin word for gold. Auraria's growth, according to one of its residents, was unprecedented in any backcountry village in the southern states. Before the town was a year old, it had 100 homes, 18 or 20 stores, 12 or 15 law offices, and 4 or 5 taverns. Its heyday was short-lived, though. By 1833, Auraria was eclipsed by the nearby town of Dahlonega. Dahlonega became the county seat, and all of the area's mining activity was centered here. Within only a few months, nearly 6,000 people had come to live in and around the town. By all accounts, this was a rowdy place. Not quite as rough as the mining towns that would later spring up in California, but lively nonetheless. Gambling houses, dancing houses, drinking saloons, billiard saloons, and 10-pin alleys were open day and night. Gold fever had the miners in its grip. When they made a strike, they could be well paid in a day's time, but more often than not, their search ended in disappointment. As Benjamin Parks put it, it's just like gambling, all luck. The quality of Georgia's gold was legendary, even in the 1830s. Said to be some of the world's finest, its purity averaged around 98%, higher than that of the gold later found in California and Alaska. Miners roamed the valleys and hollows of North Georgia looking for a promising spot, one that showed good color. Many of them used only a gold pan to work the deposits that washed into the streams. Others began digging underground, following veins of gold deep into the sides of the mountains. The gold was brought to Dahlonega and sent to places like Philadelphia, where it could be made into coins. By 1838, so much gold was being mined in the region that the federal government established a branch of the United States Mint in Dahlonega. From the time it opened its doors until the Civil War shut it down, the mint produced more than $6 million in gold coins. And this was only a fraction of what was being mined in the area. It didn't take long to find all the easy gold, though. And in 1848, when gold was discovered in California, many of the miners rushed west, hoping for yet another chance to strike it rich. For those who remained in Georgia, the work of finding gold kept getting harder until hydraulic mining came along. Water cannons, called hydraulic giants, literally washed away the sides of the mountains.
They were great big things up on legs like that. And they could turn it. It had big, nozzle out on it. And by the time it come down there, it really had the force. Oh, I've seen trees bigger than any you can see around here. They just lay them over in a few minutes. Just tear down the mountain in no time.
Hydraulic mining exposed veins of gold that otherwise would have remained buried for years. This new method allowed a few miners to move tons of earth in a single day. It also cut huge gashes through the hills and left deep canyons that scarred the countryside. After they washed the mountains down, the miners had to separate the gold from the quartz and other rocks that contained it. They did this by pulverizing the ore with heavy crushers or stamps.
And I can remember when there was at least 5 stamp mills that you could hear overnight from where we lived. You could hear all 5 of them are running. Now, they didn't run just overnight, they run day and night.
As gold became harder and harder to find, the scale of mining operations began to grow. Companies were set up and elaborate tunnels were blasted out of the mountains.
The dynamite was the worst things. Now, you done fool going back right in behind the blast because they had to blast them rocks a lot of times, and so you go back and all that smoke and everything, and it'll give you the dynamite headache. And mister, you ain't never had the headache till you get the dynamite headache.
More than 250 gold mines filled the hills and valleys of North Georgia.
There was a lot of good gold mines around here. There was a Calhoun gold mine, there was a Consolidated, Crown Mountain, Beverly, the Bath, and the Lockhart, and the Boulder Fields, and the Free Gym, and the Eddywater River, and Cane Creek, and Yehooler, and the Loud Gold Mine, Battle Branch, and oh, I can't remember half of them now, but there was a bunch of the gold mines that they worked.
By far the biggest mine in the area was the Consolidated Gold Mine of Dahlonega. Chartered in 1900 and out of business by 1906, the Consolidated was a legend, even in its own time. Investors from around the country put together $5 million to build the huge mining complex. It was the largest gold plant ever established east of the Mississippi River, and it represented big dreams that were never fully realized. Poor planning and management shut the mine down in only a few years, but with its 120 stamp mill and 500-foot tunnel, it employed many miners during its short life.
See, this big one right here was the mill. There was 120 stamps in there. And this here was where they roasted over. There's 8 furnaces in there. And there was a pipe went from that to the smokestack. And that's the way the thing looked. I remember it looking like that before they tore it out. That building was 300 feet long.
After the Consolidated closed, mining continued in Dahlonega, but on a lesser scale. Miners worked deposits scattered throughout the area or ran small stamp mills. Some of them worked on dredge boats in the Chestatee and Etowah rivers. The Depression came and went, and mining suffered along with many other businesses. It wasn't until the late 1930s that another gold mining legend came onto the scene in Dahlonega. Major Graham Dugas reopened the old Calhoun mine, and when he did, he struck one of the richest veins the mine had ever produced. Major Dugas was a first-rate mining engineer, and he made a fortune in Dahlonega, but he was a promoter as well, one who plated the dashboard of his car with gold and persuaded investors to sink their money into a mine that had already played out.
They said he went up north and he had all the dashboard of his car, plated with gold and everything. Of course, he pulled somebody's leg, I guess, for some money after he'd done worked it out. I don't know what he done, but that's what they said he done.
I don't know what I went with the car, but now there was a lot of young girls that wanted to ride in that car.
Mining on various scales continued around Dahlonega until World War II. Then the men went off to fight, and the equipment needed to run the mines was sold for scrap. The war marked the end of gold mining as big business in the Georgia mountains. With no more fortunes to be made, most miners found easier ways to make a living. But for some, gold never lost its appeal, and they never lost their appreciation for its special beauty.
Georgia gold is some of the purest gold in the actual state you're going to find anywhere. I've had assays on some of this right here, just as it came out, and it's going up at 98.46 pure. That no alloys with it, see, very little alloy. In some parts of the world, your alloy with silver, copper, and so forth, and if it's 75% pure, you're in good shape. I mean, that's good for them. Some of this stuff here is pure. That's the reason why Georgia gold is so pretty. There's no other gold more like it.
In 1828, when word went out that gold had been discovered, miners rushed to the mountains of North Georgia. Day after day and year after year, it was the dream of that next big strike that kept them going. Today, Dahlonega is experiencing a new gold rush of sorts as tourists flock to the area. Around the public square, many historic buildings still reflect the importance of gold to the region. At the old Consolidated Mine and at the Croissant, the only active gold mine in Georgia, visitors can try their hand at panning for gold. In the middle of the square, the historic courthouse building houses the Dahlonega Gold Museum. Constructed in 1836, this is the oldest existing courthouse in Georgia. Its bricks are fashioned of mud from nearby Cane Creek. They form solid walls nearly 2 feet thick, and assays have revealed tiny traces of gold. A more substantial amount of Dahlonega gold covers the steeple of the administration building at North Georgia College and State University, and the dome of the state capitol building in Atlanta. From its earliest discovery, Georgia gold attracted the dreamers and the gamblers, the ones willing to risk everything for a chance to strike it rich. In the frenzied days of the country's first gold rush, they came by the thousands, enticed by the siren call of gold. In more recent times, it's the beauty and the rich history of the region that have appealed to visitors. In the days when prospectors filled the hills and valleys, these mountains first yielded their treasure. But for nearly 2 centuries, gold has drawn people to the mountains of North Georgia. And gold, with its special allure, has captured the imagination of generations.
Awesome. How'd y'all like the movie?
Great.
All right. Let me try to think of what I want to do first. Let me start at this end. So, if y'all want to turn your attention back here